As teachers, we all want to create compelling, effective, enjoyable sequences. And a lot of times, we don't know where to begin. And in a way, even worse, we get overwhelmed. The truth is, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we have so many different possibilities when it comes to creating sequences that we can freeze up or just not completely trust our choices. In this conversation, I'm going to share with you the 5 most effective ways to stop being so overwhelmed, to refine, focus, and develop good yoga sequences, and for you personally to have more confidence and more joy in your experience of teaching yoga. My name is Jason Crandall. I've been a highly respected yoga teacher for over 25 years, and I have always specialized in helping teachers become more skillful and confident in their sequencing. I've created the most comprehensive online sequencing course that's available. If you're interested, you can find all the information at the link below. Without question, the first thing to do is to implement a consistent sequencing structure. Implementing a consistent sequencing structure is going to reduce an incredible amount of burnout, indecision, overwhelm, and fatigue. It's also, everybody, going to give your students a more consistent learning environment so that they can grow and thrive. By implementing this structure, and I'm going to show you an example, you're still going to retain an incredible amount of creative freedom and the ability to be spontaneous. In really simple terms, we are going to have a placeholder. We're going to have a specific place for all of our posture groups, and that's not going to waver. So that macro structure of where the posture groups sit in relationship to each other is not going to change. But we're going to maintain creativity and spontaneity over the individual poses and the pose combinations, the pose flows within those groups. Let's look quickly at what I call my master sequencing template. We begin with what I call the preparations. In the preparatory phase of class, we're just beginning to warm up and prepare the body and mind, and we're starting to introduce whatever we're going to focus on in class today. Following preparations, we have sun salutations. Now, this could be any sun salutation. It could be any combination of sun salutations. The duration of this segment of class is entirely up to you. You might be teaching a all levels hatha class, so you might just do a couple of sun salutations to get the body warm. You might be teaching a more ashtanga or power flow based class, in which case maybe you're going to do many more sun salutations with more complicated and demanding components to them. But we're always going to have sun salutations following preparations. Third, we flow from sun salutations into sun salutations plus standing poses. And essentially what I mean by this is we maintain the sun salutation component, so some sort of lunge base or jump back, chaturanga, up dog, down dog base, Surya Namaskar. But this is where we also start to layer in our standing poses and our standing pose flows. Now this phase is going to blend into the next. Salutations plus arm balances. Now listen, not every posture or posture group has to be included in your classes. When we look at this master sequencing template, we're essentially providing a placeholder for everything, but you might not be including everything in your class. So you might be teaching classes and not including arm balances. But if you're going to include an arm balance, this is where we're going to put them. If you're going to include several arm balances, this is where we're going to include them. I also want to note that for many people, including myself, when we get to an arm balance phase of class, sometimes this is where we actually like to drop the sun salutation flow bits, because maybe we want to have class be a little bit more workshoppy at this phase. Maybe we want to break down Bakasana, or we want to break down side crow. So I have it as sun salutations plus arm balances in the spirit of keeping continuity and rhythm and movement, but you might shift. You might at this phase kind of break tempo and just do deeper, more specific arm balance work. Following our arm balances, we have back bends. Now, there is a massive range of backbends. We have face down backbends, we have kneeling backbends, we have reclined backbends, we have inverted backbends, right? We have many different subcategories that in other contexts we can go into more deeply, but the point is, this is where we start to layer in backbends, also including specific preps. So maybe everybody at this phase, you decide, well, before you do backbends, you wanna open the hip flexors and quads with a low lunge quad stretch, or a version of pigeon pose where we reach back and catch that back foot, of course. Maybe you wanna do a little bit more targeted shoulder opening. Maybe you wanna sit down and have people do gomukhasana and fingers interlaced behind the back. So when we say backbends, I'm keeping that very broad and very open-ended. Remember, you have a lot of creative possibilities, but we just know this is now the period of class where we're incorporating this work. Following our backbends, I always prefer to have a short phase, a minute or two, of just being in a neutral spine pose. And so this is a little bit quirky, but I tend to want to kind of put the fork down after I've gotten all the way to this point. Like everything up to here, I've been working hard. I've been working my students pretty hard. So I always love this just moment of being still and being present after our backbends in a neutral spine pose. And typically what I do for that is if I have just done reclined backbends, like upward bow, just lay on the back, knees bent, feet on the floor for a minute. If I've done finished backbends with camel pose or kneeling based backbends, I might just do a minute of seated meditation before transitioning on. If I've completed backbends with more face down work like locust or cobra or bow, then I might do down dog. Or I might just lay face down, rest the forehead, and take a couple of deep breaths. Now we segue into forward bends and twists. Now, to be honest with you, it doesn't matter to me whether it's forward bends, then twists, twist, then forward bends. But these are the two categories that we want to work on. And forward bends also include hip openers, like seated hip openers. Forward bends tend to emphasize hamstring lengthening or outer hip lengthening or inner thigh lengthening depending on the posture. But the point is, at this phase, in the forward bend phase, we're doing seated, calming, slower, quieter, deeper poses where we're turning inwards. And in the twisting phase, similar. In the twist, we're now doing seated postures, simple twists. You could even do complicated twists depending on the level. But here's where we're gonna layer in our seated twists and our seated side bends. As a very quick side note, I don't typically teach inversions in public classes. The layers of this conversation would take us another long conversation. So let me just say this. If I were going to incorporate, and sometimes I do, inversions into this master sequencing template, I would most likely put shoulder stand after the back bends. I would most likely put handstand, forearm balance, and headstand before the back bends, okay? There are other ways that we could do it, and I'm gonna leave this to your innovation, preference, and discretion. The next essential key to minimizing sequencing overwhelm, and for many of you this is gonna be a little bit scary, but is to embrace consistency. We can embrace what I refer to as the 80-20 or the 70-30 rule. It's very difficult to learn anything without repetition and consistency. And I know as yoga teachers, we're afraid to bore our students, and we want to be new and different and novel, of course. But if we are always changing our sequences, if we're always being random, if we don't have continuity in what we're trying to teach our students are not gonna develop nearly as much. They're gonna plateau more quickly. And us as teachers, we're gonna start to burn out, and we're gonna just start to sequence in ways that don't really make sense. So what I wanna suggest, and there are many different ways to be more creative, but I wanna suggest a simple way that we can implement greater consistency without losing creativity, without losing spontaneity. And the simple rule, like I said, 80-20, 70-30, is this. class over class, we keep about 80 to 70% of the class the same, and 30 to 20% we change. I'm gonna give you a really simple example that honestly, I've just taught over the last 2 weeks. So in the last 2 weeks, I've been teaching classes using the master sequencing template as always, but my focus has been really on 3 different things. My focus has been on increasing our active range of motion in twists. So layman's terms, just increasing our twists. Developing the shoulder work that prepares for binds, and opening the outer hips. So these have been the 3 focal points, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming tip. But what I did in week 1 was when we were doing our preparations, I did a little bit more strong core strengthening. We kind of warmed up a little bit more, kind of a little bit stronger core strengthening. And then I did very, very modest outer hip and shoulder preparation. Then in our sun salutations, we just did 4 straightforward lunge salutations. And then when we were doing our standing poses plus sun salutations phase, again, keeping in mind we're focused on twists, shoulders, and outer hips, I had my students do high lunge twice. I had my students do low lunge twice. I had my students do revolved triangle pose. Let's pause. The next week, I essentially did the exact same focus. The next week, I focused on same components, twists, shoulders, hips. Specifically, twists, shoulder bind preparation, and outer hip work. So it was the same focal point, so that was consistent. When we were doing the preparations, though in the second week, we didn't really do any intense core stuff like we did the first week. We had a little bit softer, slower, quieter shoulder and hip preparation. So it was the same ingredients or the same components, but there was a little bit of variability. Then when we got to the sun salutations, I taught completely different sun salutations. Instead of teaching 6 low lunge salutations, I taught 2 high lunge, 2 low lunge, and 2 Surya Namaskar A. Then when we got to the standing poses, I taught the exact same progression. I taught the exact same progression as the first week of those twists. So the point that I want us to kind of get here, and then I'll walk you a little further along, is week over week, we had consistency of focal points. It wasn't random. Similarly, we had some preparations that were the same. We still did sun salutations, but the sun salutations week over week, they were completely different. And then week over week in these 2 weeks, we did the exact same standing pose flow. So again, we see about 80 to 70% of these 2 weeks was the same. But about 20 to 30%, we just kind of did the same focal points in different ways. I'm gonna continue telling you just a little bit more about this class, and then I think we'll get the point. So then when we got a little bit further into class, the first week, the week that we had focused even more early on the core strength component of twists, I included twisting arm balances. I broke down and included side crow or side crane, Parshvabhakasana. I also broke down Ekapada Kundanyasana 2, so an arm balance with a twist. And then we also did Ashtavakrasana, 8 crooked points pose, which is another twisting arm balance. So that first week, and again, I don't want you to think about whether there's the first week, second week. It doesn't really matter. The point is how to be consistent while also bringing some freshness. So that first week, we did a little bit longer increments of arm balances, twisting arm balances. And then the second week, we only came back and did 1. That second week, we only did Parshvabhakasana. Now, I could have very easily switched those. I could have very easily inverted those. But really the point here is we still had twisting arm balances. Some were the same, Parshvabhakasana. Some were different. Now, continue on in kind of wrapping up this component. When we got to the seated twists, we did the exact same seated twists. We did 4 of them. Ardha Matsyendrasana 1, Ardha Matsyendrasana 2, Baharadvajasana, And then we did a variation of Marichasana 3. Again, the actual poses are not quite as important, but in the first week and in the second week, we did the exact same twist progression. So this is just a simple example of how to maintain consistency. We had the same focal points for 2 weeks in a row. We had some of the exact same progressions for 2 weeks in a row. And then we also kind of played around with maintaining the same focal points and the same themes, but kind of having different intensity and including different poses also. So if you just keep this one thing in mind, you want to create greater consistency. You want to also maintain novelty, newness, freshness, liveliness. How do we do this? About 80 to 70% of the things, week over week, keep them about the same. And then 20 to 30%, add a little freshness and newness. The third key is to always include 1, 2, maybe even 3 focal points in every single class. Now, I just gave you an example of this. We just looked at 3 focal points that I included in class. But there are many different ways that we can do this, and I'm going to break them down. But before I do that, I want to make 2 acknowledgments. Number 1, I think in the long run, any given class, it doesn't matter so much, but generally speaking, in the long run, classes without focal points, without specific themes, whether they're philosophical, mental, emotional, or physical, which we'll talk about momentarily, classes without specific focal points or themes, they're a little unmoored. They're a little bit ungrounded. They're a little bit untethered. What we can really focus on when we teach yoga, for me, is 2 things. Whenever I sequence a class, everybody, honestly, there are 2 things I want to do when I walk into that class. Number 1, help people feel better in their body and mind. Okay? Number 2, I want to teach them 1 or 2 things. The way that I think about this and the way that I really work in depth with teachers to build this skill is I really think about there are 3 primary different categories of themes or 3 primary different categories of focal points that we can help our students learn and grow in. We can focus on physical development, we can focus on mental or emotional development, and we can focus on philosophical themes. Let's take a moment and break down each one of those categories a little bit further. When we're focused on physical attributes or skills or developments, physical focal points, we can break that into 3 parts. We can focus on peak poses, so postural development. We can focus, number 2, on a region of the body. Number 3, we can focus on specific techniques and skills. In addition to physical focal points that we might want to focus our sequence around, we also have mental or emotional focal points, mental or emotional attributes, okay? I can almost guarantee that the vast majority of you that are joining me for this conversation like physical stuff, you respect physical stuff, you're learning and you're teaching physical stuff, but in your experience of yoga practice and in your experience of what you want to teach people, it's not just completely limited to physical stuff. So many of our deep underlying motivational reasons to practice and to teach are because this practice has touched us in a really human way. It's helped us be a little bit more compassionate towards ourselves. It's helped us be a little bit more patient with ourselves. It's helped us see maybe our mental and emotional volatility or rigidity. Maybe your yoga practice has helped ease some sadness, or it's eased some anxiety, or it's helped you sleep, right? Any number of human things that aren't just about what to do in Parshabhakasana or how to stretch the hip flexors and quads in your back bends, okay? So what we can do is we can walk into a class and we can really think to ourselves, you know what I want to focus on? I want to give a good all-around practice, but I want to talk to my students just a little bit more about quieting their mind and noticing their negative self-talk. So really the focus is going to be, everybody, quieting the mind and witnessing negative self-talk if it arises. Finally, along very similar lines, we might anchor a practice in overt yoga philosophy, something that overtly comes from the yoga tradition. Oftentimes, the simplest and continuously effective source material to incorporate is to work with some of the concepts of the yamas and the niyamas, whether it's a parigraha, ahimsa, asteya, anything for you personally. If the Yoga Sutra resonates with you, the yamas and the niyamas, they're kind of endless. They're endless sources of reflection for us to step back and ask ourselves, okay, is greediness something that I need to work with in my practice, or minimizing my own hoarding or greediness or my own attachment, right? And if so, when does that come out for me, right? Does that come out for me in my forward bends? Does that come out for me in my arm balances? How does this actually present itself on the mat for me? And can we build a class around this? The fourth tip, simplify and declutter your sequences. Everybody, I think about this all the time teaching yoga and seeing sequences. And I honestly think, especially in flow yoga, especially in like modern contemporary flow yoga, there's too much going on. Part of the reason a lot of students resonate with my classes is because things stand out. Lessons are taken, classes are balanced and they feel good, but there's a focal point. I don't try to stuff too much in. And everybody, for a very long period of time as a teacher, especially when I lacked confidence, I just threw everything in. Because I thought to myself, oh, I just want to put more and more and more stuff. So we would do standing pose flows and combinations where it's like pose after pose after pose after pose. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 poses on one side. Sometimes that is fun, but it's a little bit, everybody, going back to a food analogy. It's a little bit like going to a buffet. And going to a buffet is fine once in a while. But you go to a buffet and you just kind of like put everything in, everything on your plate. And then what do you remember about the meal? Usually like that you ate too much. And that's, again, in the short term, that's satisfying, but when you over accessorize, when you put too many poses in a sequence and too many poses in a flow, the integrity and the quality of each thing starts to break down. Everything starts to get cluttered. So how do we do this? Number one, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule as to how many poses in a row or how many poses to put in a sequence, but I'm gonna go over just one thing, which is standing pose flows. And I want you to think about one simple technique for simplifying and decluttering. So my simple example on this, everybody, is let's say you have 9 standing poses. Don't do them in a row. Do 3 in a row, and then chaturanga, up dog, down dog. Then other side. Chaturanga, up dog, down dog. Then do 3 more in a row, and so on. So you don't even necessarily have to do fewer poses, although you can, and I'll address that briefly in a moment, but break them up. The second thing that we can do, everybody, honestly, do fewer things and stay longer, even in a flow. And I know this isn't always everyone's preference, but most people, most of the time, especially in the context of yoga, don't need to be overwhelmed by volume and speed. Let them slow down a little bit. Let them develop the pose. So instead of every pose being, doing more poses for 1 breath or 2 breaths, do fewer poses. Go deeper. Stay longer. Stay 3, 4, 5, 6 breaths in a pose. A little bit more breaking of the things up. And then each individual posture that you do is going to have greater depth to it. That's the final thing I'll say. If I do 9 things in a row, I'm making up the number 9, by the way, but if I do too many things in a row, not only is the skill likely to be able to go down, but then I just start to use momentum. I'm a little bit more fatigued state. I'm using a little bit more momentum, and I'm not going to go that deep because I'm not going to notice any of the details. And if we don't have some time for depth and details, even in a flow, we're kind of doing drive-by postures, right? And so you're going to have to take this in, but everybody, here's the good thing. You don't need to feel anymore like you have to overwhelm your students with countless, consistently coming up with countless poses to slap together. Make it simple. Make it simple. Go a little deeper, stay a little bit longer, and savor the time that you're actually in the posture. Final tip, probably the most important one, or at least everybody, the one that is least technical of all the tips, and most just up to you, okay? And this final tip is teach the class that you want to practice. Own it. So often as yoga teachers, we try to anticipate what our students want. And of course, we want to be engaged and attentive and responsive, of course. I don't want to teach a class that is just like my soliloquy on the world. I want to know what my students want, and I want to read that. But everybody, I can almost guarantee you, and I know you know this. Deep down, you know this. If you have 2 people in class, you have 2 people that probably want different things. When we're teaching groups, it is virtually impossible to anticipate everybody's needs, everybody's desires, and everybody's preferences. So always be kind, be inclusive, be engaging, all of those things. But understand that in terms of the actual sequencing, you will never anticipate or create the perfect sequence for everyone in that room ever. There's going to be some people that want it a little faster, some people that want it a little bit slower, some people that want it more intense, some people that want it less intense. There's going to be some people that want a little bit more technique. There's going to be some people that want less technique. Okay? So instead of putting yourself through the constant stress and unrelenting pressure of creating a class that you think everyone else is going to like, create the class you like. At least one person will like class if you create the class that you like, right? When you create the class that you like, a lot of people are going to like it because you're naturally going to have shared interests. But also, everybody, when you create the class that you want to take, I say this to my students all the time, right? Like, as the teacher of the class, I should almost make myself jealous from time to time. I should almost make myself jealous that I want to be in this pose right now. I want to be doing this. Oh, I was doing this earlier. This felt so good. Not to put more pressure on you, but when you're teaching the class that you want to be in, you're going to be excited about it. When people are into what they're into, it's infectious, right? And when a teacher is excited about a class, and when you are teaching class, And it's not just coming from here, but it's coming from here. Like it's coming from your lived experience. Like you like this thing and you want to share this thing and you like this pace and you like this intensity. It's infectious. There is just this genuineness that comes through. If you are sharing something that matters to you and that you would like to be doing right now, there's going to be an audience for it, okay? 100%. All of the webinars that I do, all of the classes that I teach, the podcasts that Andrea and I do, the teacher's companion that I want to do, the first consideration in 100% of the content I create is am I interested? Like everything that I share with you, including this conversation, are things I'm genuinely interested in. They're things I want to pass along to you. So take that into your sequences. And a big part of this, everybody, is trusting yourself. And even more than trusting yourself, it's trusting that let's limit it to this. We'll limit the scope. It's trusting that your experience of yoga is valid and that it's shared, that your experience of how to prepare best for your back bends or how to prepare best for your forward bends or the kind of combinations that you like to do, it's valid. It's your preference. It's valid. When you kind of center the sequence around something you really enjoy and feel good about and want to do and share, and then tweak it as you see fit, modify it as you see relevant to the people that are in the room, I can't think of a single better protocol to work with. The focus of this conversation, everybody, is managing sequencing overwhelm. So let me wrap by saying this. Pick just one of those 5 things to work on. You don't have to do everything all at once. So if any one of those last 5 tips feels particularly resonant to you and more immediate and applicable, just start there. Right? Again, you don't have to do everything all at once. You don't have to be everything for everyone. No one is. Just do your best, focus on whatever one of these things comes to mind. And as you do that, take your existing sequencing process and protocol and just begin to hone in on that one technique, right? Just begin to utilize, take what you already have and what you're already doing and start with one stage of refinement and minimizing your sense of getting overwhelmed with developing sequences. Like I said at the beginning, teaching sequencing to teachers is an absolute passion of mine. It's my favorite subset skill that I love to teach as a yoga teacher. Those of you that want to go deeper with me on this subject, I have standalone course, The Art of Yoga Sequencing. You can join me for that. Similarly, sequencing is an integral part of my advanced teacher training program, my 300-hour program. It's in so many ways, my 300-hour program is really built around sequencing, okay? So if that resonates with you, I would love to work with you in these environments. Otherwise, I genuinely hope that this conversation sets up, even if it's just one thing from this conversation that you can take and run with and feel more grounded and comfortable and confident, then I'm happy about that. Okay, everybody? Thanks a ton, and I will hope to see you again soon.